Good morning, Gamecock fans. Today is Thursday, January 30th. This is Coffee with JC Sherbert. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching the video. If you're tuning in on podcast, on the Inside the Gamecocks podcast stream, thank you. Please go rate all of our shows 5 stars on the podcast app on Apple. If you're on Google Play, I don't know if they have a rating system or not because I've never had an Android. So there we go. But that's not a badge of honor because I had a BlackBerry up until the time I got an iPhone in 2011 and haven't looked back since. A big fan of Apple products because I am not the most technically sound, believe it or not, even though I've made most of my career on the internet. I'm more of a producer, content producer than a tech guy. And the Google stuff, the Android stuff, the PC stuff always seemed to get viruses, couldn't work it well. So there's that. But thank you so much for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, please hit subscribe on our channel. Many of you have, and we certainly appreciate that. That out of the way, what I want to talk about today, I got an email from a listener that said, JC, on coffee or on the show, and we almost got to it on the show at the end yesterday. We kind of, as we do sort of in that second hour at times, got off topic and started kind of cutting up and laughing. But that's what the show is. The show in its form now with Phil and I is it's a lot of entertainment, a lot of sports talk too, Gamecock talk, but it's a lot of banter. That's different shows are designed in different ways. This one is basically a kind of a daily football focused podcast kind of deal. There's no live element. It's recorded. You try to get it out by 8 o'clock Eastern every morning. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Most of the time it does. And it's supposed to be short and things like that. So, and you guys understand that. I'm not speaking to an unintelligent audience here at all. But I almost got to it yesterday, so I decided to save it over for today because it's sort of important, and it's one of those things where there's sometimes a disconnect between what the reality of the situation is and what it's not. And when you start diving into criticism of coaches, I've found that anything you say to explain, or most of the things you say to explain, if someone has swallowed a narrative or come up with a narrative in their head, anything you really say outside of massively good production or wins, it goes in one ear and out the other. It's a bottom line kind of deal, and everything else sounds like an excuse. Big difference between excuses and valid reasons in football, I think. And it's a bottom line business, but I think sometimes we could sort of not overreact. And there's a ton of overreaction out there. Everybody from Paul Feinbaum on down around the SEC overreacts and makes these grandiose statements and all that good stuff. I try not to do that. I try to kind of dig into the details, and I think that's why people listen to what I have to say sometimes, is I'm not necessarily going to go out and just trash everybody one week and not the next. I mean, this past year in football, for example, what I said with the Old Dominion game was that if Carolina plays like that, they won't win an SEC game at all. Same thing with Ole Miss. And that's true, but it's if you play like that. It didn't mean the season's doomed. It kind of means they could play better, and obviously they did. Basketball this year, different story. There's other issues there, but that we won't talk about. We'll talk about it on the show today if you want. So anyway, I got an email in from a listener, a loyal listener. Said, JC, maybe you can talk about this on the show or coffee, but I have a friend that swears Mike Shula is Marcus Satterfield 2.0. And of course, that makes me cringe. I've never seen anybody worse than Marcus Satterfield. And, sometimes you may think it's a Gamecock thing, but you go to Nebraska and you hear the same kind of things come up. Dana Holgerson comes in mid-year and just trashes the massive playbook and cuts it down. And, oh, lo and behold, Nebraska's offense got better. They got to a bowl for the first time since 2016. And now heading into next year, there's a lot of hope and optimism. Same thing happened here in 2022. Tennessee on and forward the last two games of the season. They shrunk it down, and while Satterfield called the plays, there were some parameters. That's an aside, though, and we've talked of that to death. Take that horse and shoot it or something, you know. But it's one of those things where is Mike Shula Satterfield 2.0, and the concern is, you know, that they were calling plays that told Lenora Sellers in the bowl not to run. Well, there's a couple of things about that. Number one, there's no need to worry about Marcus Satterfield 2.0 ever. Kurt Roper wasn't the most popular offensive coordinator around here, got fired after Will Muschamp's best season. There was a reason for that. They had a lot of NFL talent in 2017. The offense was not what you would call a scoring machine, despite having really good players and weapons. Even after Deebo Samuel got hurt, it was coming. And the Clemson game where he's running it up the middle, down, 20 in the third quarter after a disastrous first half, and the clock's just ticking away. That wasn't going to work. And obviously they got a lot better after they got rid of him. But I would take Kurt Roper all day long over Marcus Satterfield. Just if I had a binary choice to say, all right, who can win me a game, or who will cause me to lose, I would go with, obviously, with Kurt Roper. And Kurt Roper does not rank very high on my list of offensive coordinators, although I think NC State has him calling the plays next year. Good luck. But so there's no need to worry about that. Now, you get into play calling. Play calling here is a big topic because there's just been issues with it through the years. I mean, going back to what Carolina runs on offense is a big topic because it's blown up in the face of many a good coaches, many a bad coaches. It blew up on Joe Morrison between 87 and 88. Gamecocks ran what's called the run and shoot offense. It was futuristic. Todd Ellis, while he threw a lot of interceptions, and I understand they were trying to cut down on that, it was kind of a futuristic deal back then. But Joe Morrison scrapped it. He hired Al Groh, a career defensive coach, except 1 year at Carolina, as the offensive coordinator. They ran a pro-style offense, got off to a good start, but it just wasn't the same, and people kind of figured it out. A lot happened with the 88 team, which is ranked in the top 10 for, I think, as high as 6th at some point, or 8th. And then they lost to Georgia Tech, and it was anyway. Most of you probably don't remember that, but I do, which means, again, I'm getting old. I gripe about that every day. Going to try to not gripe about it as much, the age thing. But so that happened. Brad Scott, you know, the one thing he did well was call plays. And his offense, most years at South Carolina, was good, you know, with the exception of, you know, when they play a really tough team like Tennessee or Florida or Georgia, you know, there were some low scoring games. The defense was the issue, obviously. But after, you know, 4 years of good offense and bad defense, you know, Mike McGee, the AD at the time, said, "Hey, look, you got to change this, and I'll give you the resources to go hire a D coordinator." No. The idea was South Carolina was going to become Clemson from the 80s. They made a recycled bad hire at offensive coordinator Anthony Wright's senior year. They couldn't move it. They ended up scrapping it and going back to the spread, you know, midway through the year. I think Kentucky, Ole Miss games, and they did start scoring more. But at the end of the day, they were 1-10, and Brad Scott got fired. Go to Lou Holtz. First year, 0-11. Lou's running the Notre Dame offense from the early 90s in 99. Option and such. Didn't work. That wasn't the way the game was going. Well, Skip Holtz, his son, had ran a spread option attack at Connecticut. Actually, you know, kind of inspired Dan Mullen and Urban Meyer, who had some connections to Lou and Notre Dame and Skip, to start running what they eventually ran at Florida and what Dan Mullen's run for his whole career. I'm not saying Skip Holtz necessarily was like the godfather of it, but he was running it before they were. And so they switched to that in 2000 and then '01, and it worked. And then, you know, Lou wanted to go back to the option style in '02. That led to 5-7 the next year. It was just like a hybrid. Lou finally took it back over in '04. They went 6-5, had a good team. Uh, and it kind of went back and forth. I don't know that Lou Holtz necessarily calling plays. I think Skip was, but there were parameters to try to do a ground base attack. The Gamecocks were real deep at tailback. So that didn't work. Lou ended up retiring. So in comes Spurrier. And then this dumped gasoline on it because the greatest play caller in the history of college football, and I'll stand by that. I think, you look at what he did for so long when he was dialed in and calling plays, especially late in his career at South Carolina. But for the most part, that guy, and he goes to what was the Alliance and had a walkie-talkie and hadn't missed a beat. I mean, I think he's the best ever. I think there's a lot of good ones, but people talk about Lincoln Riley, who's a really good play caller. Not much else. I think we can say that by now. I don't think he can hold a candle to Steve Spurrier. Among your like spread guys, air raid guys, I'll take Cliff Kingsbury over Lincoln Riley every day of the week. And Mullen's a good play call. I mean, there's good ones, but Spurrier's the best. So he comes, and then around '08, he starts to kind of, I don't know, divvy it up. Spurrier Jr. called the plays. That didn't work. Mangus and Elliott come in. Elliott's calling the run game. That worked, but sometimes in game when things weren't going well, they'd switch up. I mean, it was amazing. If he wasn't so good and that offense wasn't so good, I don't know how they score. It was a very unique setup, but hey, it worked for the most part. Even that 15 team, once he kind of left and Mangus took over, they were pretty good on offense. Even though they went 3-9, but it was, it was always a topic of conversation as to why he wasn't calling plays and why he was delegating. So you have that. What's the Will Muschamp narrative? Can't figure out how to hire an offensive coordinator, and he did go through them. Roper, McClendon, finally Mike Bobo for 1 year. Worked at times, especially BMAC in 2018 when the defense was gutted. But that was constantly, a conversation that Gamecock fans had. I mean, I've gone through 30 years. So, we get to Beamer, who kept Bobo, and then we know what happened. And so Satterfield comes in. The first year, there's no quarterback. Probably should have gone with Jason Brown earlier. Did not, or even to carry on Joyner. But that team scraped together, overachieved by any measurement. We know how important quarterbacks are, and they didn't have one, obviously. And then guys kept getting hurt. Luke Doty gets hurt. What they were asking Luke to do was ridiculous, or what Satterfield was. But they win the bowl against North Carolina. They're 7-6. They got a big win over Auburn, a big win over Florida that year. They had some momentum. So the next season, Satterfield comes back, and it's more of the same. Like the problems you identified, like only having 250 yards in a game at Missouri you should have won. And you lost 31-28. If it weren't for the defense getting turnovers, you wouldn't have had that. The play call on third down or second down, where Jordan Birch threw a pass at Tennessee. Before that, I mean, it just was on and on and on, man. And finally, they fixed it, and we saw what happens. Well, here's how costly that ended up being. South Carolina they finished 8-5. They're 8-4 in the regular season. And they had a lot of talent. I mean, think about that receiving core, the tight ends they had on that team, the when Marshawn Lloyd was healthy, that running back. I mean, they had some talent. I mean, if you'd have put it all together, that was an offense that was hard to stop. And I don't know. Did they beat Arkansas in a shootout out there? The final was 41-30. Rocket Sanders ran all over them. Um, I don't know. Arkansas finished 6-6. I know against that Florida defense down there, Carolina would have at least been competitive. The Gators got a lot of rushing yards against Carolina defense, but they lost 38-6. They didn't score against what was a bad Florida D, especially by their standards. I mean, it was not a good Florida defense. 38-6, and that facilitated the change. And then of course, there was the Missouri game at home, which was in between those two losses, where he couldn't figure out anything to do once Lloyd got hurt. There was no adjustment in that one against, again, a 6-6 Missouri. They lost to 3 6-6 teams. Those go the other way, and everything else holds. South Carolina is in the 4-team college football playoff that year with Spencer Rattler. So it's costly. So he goes out and hires Dowell Loggins, and at this point, nobody wants to hear anything about an unknown, and Dowell was an unknown. I think Dowell did a good job for the most part. I think the things he did made sense. Did he get too conservative at times? Yes. He came in and stripped all the nonsense away, making it way too hard. He was not trying to be a mad scientist. The players enjoyed the offense. He did a really good job with Spencer Rattler, and eventually gets the App State job. And then, rightfully so, they promote Shula. So this causes some conversation. There are even people that didn't like the fact he promoted Shula, which I thought made a ton of sense, given where we're at in college football these days and all that good stuff. So I'll break this down, and then Shula coaches the bowl game, and then there's a loss. And so that gets right back to the same conversation. I want to say I understand all that after everything for the past 30 years with regards to play callers and offensive scheme and the wrong decisions being made time and time again by head coaches. I totally understand the shell shock. But I think, I can't sit here and guarantee Mike Shula is going to be this smashing success as a play caller at South Carolina. I think he's a good play caller. I think he's proven that. I think they did well at Alabama in the college ranks with play calling and scheme. It wasn't really that. Kind of like I mentioned, Carolina had no quarterback in 2021. Go look at the quarterback injuries under Mike Shula at Alabama. We think the offensive line last year, 2023, had some issues with injuries at Carolina. You start losing quarterbacks like that, your days are numbered, especially at Alabama, where they don't care. That is an excuse. They'll chalk that up in the excuse box. He goes to the NFL, coaches a lot of good players. Really, the thing that stands out on his resume isn't so much play calling as it is quarterback development. I mean, and that's more of something that translates better, like instantly, because with schemes and things like that, and the guys that have done it on both levels can explain this and have, the Chip Kellys of the world that have coached on both levels, the guys like Cliff Kingsbury, a guy like a Bill O'Brien. They've been Steve Sarkisian. They've been pretty good on both levels. And so they'll explain, you got to kind of strip it down. You can't do as much. Your cadence can't be super long. I mean, you can't confuse everything. These are college kids still. They're getting paid, certainly, but there's still only so many hours in the week that you can work. You got to go to class. I mean, there's just not enough time. The NFL guys work on it all day. They drive to the office, work on it all day. So the good ones understand that. I'm sure Shula understands that. So you kind of look at it, and so that the actual scheme and calls and game planning and things of that nature doesn't translate because of time primarily, but also you have developing players. They're not gonna be able to know what to do. And there's a reason the pros are the pros. Like one of the things with the during the Satterfield era that was just bizarre was sometimes what they were asking the offensive line to do, basing it on the Los Angeles Rams. And I'm like, well, the Rams, who do they have over at right tackle or right guard? Dude was an All-American at someplace like Iowa or something. He runs 4'9" at 315 pounds. He's super athletic. He can get there on like an enormous sweeping pull and a complex blocking thing. These guys that, in the SEC, where defensive lines have an advantage, defenses are fast, and a lot of your offensive linemen are emerging, developing, whatever. You're not going to have that guy every year. In fact, you're not going to have him most years. So that kind of thing is what the pro folks, when they come back to college, get in trouble for. They get greedy and arrogant. I think the NFL is all about football arrogance. Speaking of which, Bill Belichick met with Gamecock quarterback target Jared Curtis this week. So see if the Tar Heels and Chapel Bill end up being a factor with him. So anyway, that's kind of the long and short of why it doesn't always translate. I think Shula, having been in college at least for 4 years as a head coach, and certainly the game's evolved and things like that, I can't see it. I can't see him not understanding that, especially having been at Carolina this year. So I would not worry at all about that translating. Do I, is it fair to think, well, how good is he going to be? I think that's fair. When you look at the NFL track record, which again does not translate, pretty good. Like most NFL coaches, he ends up getting fired, but pretty good. Certainly better than Dowell Loggins at that level. But a lot of it in the NFL is who do you have at quarterback and who, where are you at? What kind of team do you have with regards to the stats? And of course, he was coordinator on the Carolina Panthers Super Bowl team when Cam Newton won the league MVP and was very good at using Cam in his strengths, I think, that season. Went on to Buffalo and helped Josh Allen and all that. But we're talking about play calling, and I would look at it fairly and say the strength of Shula's coaching career in the NFL has not necessarily been play calling and explosive offense and all that. I think he's had some very creative moments going back to Alabama, and I don't think he's a vanilla guy when that happens. But the strength has obviously been, and it's because he's so good at it, getting quarterbacks to be better. And so that brings me to my next point here, because the email went on to say that they were worried that I guess Lenore Sellers had been coached not to run in the bowl game. And it looked like there were yards to be had at times. He did stay in the pocket and he was faithful to the passing game, checked down a lot more than I remember. And they played defensively. They played Carolina a lot like Ole Miss did, and Old Dominion's different. They're just a different animal with how they played. But those three teams played Carolina one way. And I've said this before, so did Kentucky and Vanderbilt, and Carolina was fine in those. But I'm not saying that's the secret to stopping the Gamecocks. But it playing like they did kind of forces you to be patient a little bit. But there were running lanes. Folks that saw that in Orlando were correct. So I want to point this out. That's not a play call. That's not a, hey, Lenoris, run this play, but don't you run at all. Just don't run at all. It's up to the quarterback to run when he's got it. I think what happened as far as him not running is, keep in mind he's still a young quarterback, and he's kind of at the top of the world there after the Clemson game, primarily because of what he did with his legs. Wasn't the best day passing for the Gamecocks up at Clemson, but he took the team on his shoulders and looked amazing running the ball 166 yards on the ground. I mean, that's something, and could not be stopped no matter what they did. And Shula in his press conference talks about, hey, we want to coach him up to stay in the pocket and, not leave yardage out there and make passes too. And I think what Lenoris did was overcorrect. And that happens with young players, even ones that have been through a whole season. And again, that may sound like an excuse, but it's not. Sometimes quarterbacks, just like pitchers and golfers and anybody else, they have to find the sweet spot with things that are hard to do, i.e., putting. It's hard to do in golf, i.e., pitching, whatever goes into all that in baseball, i.e., name it. Name something that's hard to do in sports. You have to find the sweet spot because you're trying to, you're trying to make better decisions, and sometimes you can emphasize that too much in your head, and it causes you not to run as much. And I also think this in the bowl game, and this may be a conspiracy theory, I don't know. I think the pass blocking was better than it had been against Illinois. And I think there's a little bit of surprise because the previous game 30 days ago, that the layoff also was Clemson, and Clemson sent I mean, they were sending players and getting pressure. He was running right by him. It sped him up. I think he almost had crazy as it sounds, too much time. And guys didn't get open, and it just didn't click as far as him running the football like he's capable of in that game. But he wasn't coached to do that. That's not in the playbook. But I understand why people think that, because Shula mentioned it, and then all of a sudden he's back there with green grass, not running, and so I get it. But trust me, he's not coached to do that. It's about finding the sweet spot with him. Right. And it really, if you think about it, makes no sense to say, oh, well, this change from Loggins to Shula has caused Sellers to they're telling him not to run. They're not going to use him. He's going to stay in the pocket, blah, 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 that kind of thing. It makes no sense because Mike Shula essentially was Lenoris Sellers' personal quarterbacks coach the entire season. Dowell Loggins ran the offense, still coached the quarterbacks and all that. But he was more of like the head coordinator, and then Shula, and you can see it on the sidelines during the game, he was kind of Sellers' guy, which I think was huge as far as Lenoris's development, because you have a guy that made David Gerard into a Pro Bowler, Cam Newton into an MVP, and helped Josh Allen get to be where Josh Allen is. Josh Allen was a guy from Wyoming that they had to basically teach how to run, any kind of like sophisticated passing offense. So his track record with quarterbacks, and then what he did this year, he's got a really great one, like I said. So it doesn't make much sense for him, right, to say, well, now that I'm the coordinator, forget everything I taught you. I mean, don't you think that if it was really Shula saying don't run, that he would have been told not to run during the season because that's the guy that's coaching him? Yeah, probably. So I just wanted to alleviate those concerns. The quarterback has to get it right himself, and he will. If anything, he doesn't. Lenoris fixes things and quickly. Some players can't in season. They have to have an off season and get better and all that. Sellers fixed it week to week. So, and then I want to talk about the playbook for the bowl game. And this is something Tony Morrell reported on thebigspur.com about a month ago. I can mention it now because it was members only. And I've mentioned it briefly several times. There wasn't a lot of time for Mike Shula to take over the offense and kind of put his stamp on it, right? There's going to be a lot of continuity with same play, same sets, same philosophy. But there are some things with play callers that, that are staples that they like to go to. And maybe they're the same play called something different or whatever. And it's hard to step in with somebody else's playbook or another playbook and run it when you hadn't been doing it all year. That said, no problem with the calls. I thought that, or the sets or the formations. I was told, and Tony reported this too, that Sean Elliott really helped him. Mike Fury really helped him, and he leaned on them to kind of, go through everything. Much more collaborative than it has been, which is good because I really am a fan of Sean Elliott's run game. The two back set, and I've said this before, with Brown as a lead blocker was something kind of new. I like that because you didn't have Rocket. And lo and behold, on that short yardage play, Oscar Attaway broke loose for a 36-yard touchdown. I think they can use that because of who Brown is as a blocker. I think they really can kind of evolve that a little bit. But who knows? So there's things that Mike Shula is going to put in and take out and all that without a dramatic overhaul of the offense that will give you a better idea of kind of what he's all about offensively. And then he'll go call it. So, knowing those things, knowing that, he was Sellers' quarterback's coach all year and didn't coach him not to run, it's probably an overcorrection by the player, and it happens. Knowing that he didn't have his, all of his playbook, and it's hard to do what he did, and still called it. The actual calls were fine to me. There's questions as far as, the short passes, the dump offs, and could Sellers have run for more? That's a fair question, but that's not a play call. That's up to the quarterback. And then his track record and the progress the offense did make by him doing a really good job with the most important position on the field last year. I think that can kind of give you something to latch on to answer this question that I've spent 30 minutes answering, which is fine because I like talking about this kind of stuff. This can kind of answer your questions as to, is there reason for concern? And I say that to also say I can never guarantee any play callers are going to work out. I like Shula better than the last two Beamer had as far as that goes. I liked a lot of what Dowell Loggins did, and I think that there's a lot of it that he didn't get credit for, specific play calls in games that he maybe should have. I think he did a really good job. He was in no danger of losing it, but he got the App State job. That's a great Group of Five job, and that's his dream, is to be a head coach. That's why he came back to college, and there's that. Certainly, there's no question like him better than Satterfield. I think that, I'm a fan of Mike Bobo as far as play calling and in-game adjustments and stuff. Can Mike Shula be just as good? Yeah. Certainly like him better than McClendon year two. Definitely like him better than Roper. Definitely like him better than what Spurrier Jr. did when he called it. So I mean, this guy to me, before he calls a full year, is on the upper end of on paper the hires. And like with every assistant coach, you just give him I'm going to give him a chance. I just don't think the bowl game, given everything, is like, oh my gosh, we're in trouble now because Mike Shula's calling the ball plays. So I didn't really even see any like, oh, what the heck are you doing on this down and distance? The Gamecocks were a little pass heavy. A lot of that depends on the defense. So just give him a shot. That's all I ask. And there's not very many fans out there. This is not like one of the biggest meltdowns in the history of thebigspur.com was when Dowell Loggins got hired because they were like, who? Huh? You just go through the SAT years, forgettable. and there's a guy, the tight ends coach at Arkansas gets the job. That turned out pretty well, considering you went and got the tight ends coach at Arkansas, who, by the way, had 20 years of play calling experience at the NFL level. But, back to Shula, I think this could be really good at the end of the day. If, certain things happen and, there's not like a reversion or complexities that get inserted into it. But I mean, Mike Shula's been around football for a long time. I would be very surprised if he did what Satterfield did. I mean, just shocked. I just don't. I don't think that works. I think everybody knows it doesn't work. There's a reason Charlie Weiss when he called plays. It was only really good at it when he had like Brady Quinn and Jimmy Clausen, two advanced type quarterbacks, and everywhere else he failed in college because it was too complex what he was trying to do. So anyway, that's my Mike Shula info speech. Other news, Donovan Darden, now the highest ranked player in the Gamecocks 2025 class. We talked about that yesterday. Went back, did some more research on him. Gosh, I don't know, man. He may get on the field next year. And I'll tell you another one. Kendall Daniels is a guy we all kind of forgot about because he was a heavy lean, was supposed to commit in the spring, committed later. I've talked to some folks that watched him play this year. He's about 6'3", 190, safety. There is one open safety spot. I don't know that he can't get in there and compete. He's going through spring practice, so keep an eye on him. Also, official visits are starting to be set up on the recruiting end of things. Four-star receiver Gordon Sellers, June 6th through 8th. That is Sellars, Sellars, not spelled like Lenore's, I don't think. And he's a four-star receiver out of Charlotte. Gamecocks and Clemson there. He had a really good visit for Junior Day. It's gone back and forth. So was told before Junior Day, Clemson may have a slight edge. Now maybe the Gamecocks. Jared Curtis, who we mentioned earlier, June 20th, and Darius Gray, big-time offensive lineman out of the state of Virginia, who I believe South Carolina has led for some time. Of course, the Gamecocks lost the offensive lineman out of Virginia. They led for some time to Maryland last year for whatever reason. But really good player, could play inside, could play outside. He's on the docket for that weekend. So it's looking like, based on Jared Curtis and Darius Gray scheduling visits for the 20th of June, that's going to be probably the most star-studded weekend. People call it the big weekend. They're all big. They're usually all pretty big. But that one, so far, with those two big-time recruits lined up, will be ready to go. Basketball team back in action Saturday. Women's back in action Sunday. Baseball's right around the corner. JB has you covered on that. He and Will Crow had a great conversation yesterday on Inside the Gamecocks, the morning show, so check that out as well. This has been Coffee with J.C. Sherbert. Hope you have a wonderful morning. Also want to send my condolences, thoughts, and prayers out to the victims of the mid-air collision in Washington, D.C. last night between a Black Hawk helicopter and a regional jet, American Airlines flight from Wichita, Kansas into Reagan International. I've had a bad feeling something like this. There's been too many close calls with mid-air collisions for the past couple of years, really. And it worries me every time I get on a plane. And it was very, very sad to read that last night, and just praying for the families and for all involved. And about the only good thing that can come out of anything like this is make sure this never happens again. There's too much. We have too much technology now for a routine approach into an airport for this to happen. Anyway, didn't want to get into that too much, and would have led the pod here with it, but wanted to talk football first. Anyway, JC Sherbert here, Coffee, signing off. Holler at you soon. Don't forget Inside the Gamecocks, the show later today between noon and 2. Jamie will be along between 10 and 12 with Inside the Gamecocks, the morning show.